If you don't know how to solder, I don't recommend that, because you'll melt the board, you'll lift the trace, you'll do something horrible.
Hello, gear nerds of the internet. As I said, soldering into an existing PCB and desoldering and resoldering can cause some headaches. And in my hubris, I called out the fact that it's something I could do. It's something that I've done. But it kind of went awry here. Just like I said. It didn't make me cry, but it did aggravate me. Let's talk about this. So, this is the Stealth Phono preamplifier. And if you watched my last video, you knew that they made a Magnum version of this, which had some modifications to it. They replaced 4 capacitors of the same value with higher quality capacitors, and then they added capacitors to the output RCA jacks, which is what I've done. As you can see, these things are huge. Mammoth. This is what I pulled out of there. This little guy. Yeah. And then this one went there. So that one's longer and bigger than that one too. And then these guys were originally wires. So let's talk about the troubles that I've had with this thing. You might notice that there's a screw missing from that. That's because immediately it began to strip out and would not come out, so I had to drill it out. That was a bad omen. I should have taken it as such that this was going to be more of a headache than I had anticipated. So, as I had alluded to in my previous video, desoldering from a PCB, depending on the quality of the PCB, can be a tricky proposition. And that proved to be true here. So the immediate thing I did was I removed this capacitor. I removed one side of it, and it ripped up the trace part right underneath where that little pad it was to solder that guy back in. So immediately I knew that I was going to have to create essentially point-to-point. Let's see, one second. Here we go, this is much bigger. So you may be able to see, maybe not. Yeah, there you go, that's better. So from this resistor to here, I've added what is essentially a piece of the lead from this capacitor, because those came right off. The pads that you would solder to came right off. And so then I had to complete the trace, which went from that resistor to that capacitor on both sides. You can see there a similar situation. Same over here, same over there. These gigantic clarity caps have a bigger lead, like the diameter of the lead is bigger than what I pulled out of there, which is this. Like it, I don't know if you can really see the difference in size. So that made getting it back in tricky. And the size of them too, I actually feel better about having that solder joint holding that together, because if it was just reliant on the soldering to the board there, I would feel pretty sketched out about this thing making a good connection going forward. It seems like it would very easily break the solder joint and or the connection on the board. So currently these aren't going anywhere. These guys provided a little bit less of an issue, as did these, but just slightly. I mean, when this sort of thing happens, you have a couple of options. Sometimes you could scrape. So what this has over this, as you can see, these are these traces here. Underneath there is a metallic trace that sometimes you could scrape the top of this off and then make that make the metal so that you can actually solder back to it. But with something of this size, I was not confident that that would be a good solution going forward, so I did not do that, which is why I just did those jumpers from where they were going. Yeah. Anyway, so needless to say, this is a big pain in the butt. It was way harder than I thought it was going to be. But alas, it was done. So now that we've talked about the issues I had making these modifications, let's talk about the sound, because that's really what's important here. So I plugged it in. It worked immediately, so that's great. It's something you always worry about when you're especially shotgunning a bunch of parts in, that you're going to have something messed up or it's not going to work properly, but it worked fine. It didn't sound good at first. It sounded really weird, I guess, for lack of a better term. I didn't let that dissuade me from listening to it. I listened to it for a couple of hours and found that as it went, it started to sound better and better as I put more hours on it. I'm not one who tends to believe that you have to run in your electronics and break it in, but maybe you do. I don't know, because that fixed it. I also had a similar circumstance with the Emotiva Phono preamp, where it started to sound better as I listened to it, and it wasn't my ears adjusting. That seems to be the obvious answer of why that happens, but it's not what it was. So once it settled into its sound, it sounded substantially better. The low end was flushed out a bit. The mids and highs were smoother. So the bass didn't extend that much, but what was there was a bit more plush. It gave everything a bit more of a I'm hesitant to call it warm, because I don't think it was warm necessarily, but it was, and not necessarily, well, I guess thicker to some degree, but not, I wouldn't say that it was like overly warm or overly thick or whatever. The mids and highs, maybe. So I found this originally, the highs, to be kind of strident. That seemed to fix the issue. The mid-range I liked a lot on this. That maybe toned down the mid-range a little bit, but it's still enjoyable. It's just not as maybe three-dimensional in the mids as it had been previously. So comparing this directly to two preamplifiers, one being the Mani 2. This is better than the Mani 2. The Mani 2, I love the Mani 2 for $150. I think you're really hard-pressed to find a better preamp, a Phono preamp, at $150 than the Mani 2. I might even say that you would probably be hard-pressed to find anything under $300, maybe even $500. That's better than the Mani 2. This is better than the Mani 2, for sure, which makes sense, because this was originally a $900 Phono preamplifier. I paid a lot less than that when I bought it used, and then I put like $60 worth of caps in there, which to me it was worth $60. That really brought everything. The entire sound is way better now than it was previously. So that's to be expected. If it didn't beat the Mani 2, I would say then this thing really kind of stinks. But it didn't. It clearly beat the Mani 2. And it probably beat the Mani 2 in its stock configuration as well, although it has less low-end stock than the Mani 2. So I compared this to the Sutherland 2020, which is still a $300 preamp versus this guy. This is good. The Sutherland is still a lot better. I actually like the mid-range and the highs better on the Rogue, shockingly. But the soundstage, the depth, the bass, all better on the Sutherland. You like see further in to the music, if that makes any sense. It probably doesn't. With the Sutherland than this, it like sort of envelops you into the sound. The only thing that I found interesting is now after this modification, the mids and the highs on this I think are better than the Sutherland. The Sutherland comparatively, especially in the highs, it was a little harsh compared to this. But ironically, I would have said the exact opposite before the mods, that the Sutherland had smoother highs and mids, whereas now this does. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep both of them or either of them. I haven't decided which I'm going to keep. I would be hesitant to actually ship this with these gigantic caps that shifting and being dropped and whatever is going to dislodge these, and whoever receives it is going to have a non-functional Phono preamp. So that might be a concern. This thing is completely enjoyable to listen to. It is really nice. The Sutherland is just a step up. The Sutherland is, over twice as expensive, so I guess you would expect that to be better. I don't know what I'm going to do. If you only ever heard this and you never heard the Sutherland, you would be happy to live with this. This would be probably an end game sort of component where someone would get this and be like, oh yeah, this is all I ever need. But, comparison is the thief of joy. All right, so has anyone done mods like this to these guys? Let me know what you thought. Has anyone tried to desolder stuff on Rogue PCBs and had these sort of issues? I was kind of surprised. I thought that these PCBs would be easier to desolder from. I actually had a Chinese-made Bewitch 6550 amplifier that I replaced the capacitors in that with these guys, these Jensen Superior Z caps. That I actually, because these leads are a lot thicker than what was in there, I actually had to drill out. I had to remove it and drill out the PCB a little bit to get those guys in there. That thing had no issues with desoldering, resoldering, or even drilling out. This thing kind of just fell apart. I'm kind of shocked by that. But I'm not an electrical engineer. I don't know what makes PCBs better, one from the other. So I only know that this one was a pain in the butt to work on. So be careful. If I had this thing and I was to do this all over again, what I would do is I would desolder these wires from this end, from the terminal end on the input jack, or I guess it'd be the output jack, and then solder. Sorry about that. My wife decided to run some laundry. I would desolder it from here. I would then connect this to here and then leave this in and connect the other side of that to this. I'm going to guess that 90% of the betterment of the sound is due to these caps here versus just that. I would start there. And if that gets you, I'm going to guess that's going to get you 90% of the sound upgrade. I might not mess with those guys. Another thing you could have done to make it less annoying is you could have clipped these leads and then soldered these leads onto these directly, so you didn't actually have to desolder anything. That's another way of getting around desoldering something from the board. But you know, hindsight is 2020, and the Sutherland is 2020. Interesting. All right, guys, have a good day.